Good evening, everyone. I'm Jeanette Rosenbaum, a director of the Muddy Branch Alliance, and I will be your moderator for tonight's panel discussion of Hometown Habitat, Stories of Bringing Nature Home. This event is sponsored by the Lands Green, Waters Clean program, the Muddy Branch Alliance, the Isaac Walton League of America, the City of Gaithersburg, and the Chesapeake Bay Trust. Thank you to all our partners. Let's meet our panelists. Lauren Hubbard holds a PhD in plant biology, and she is certified as a Chesapeake Bay landscape professional, a weed warrior, and a master gardener. As the owner of Native by Design and a native plant nursery, Lauren works with property owners and organizations to design and install native plant gardens. Lauren also started the Butterfly Bandwagon Project, which helps people talk to their neighbors about the importance of native plants, and she is the program manager for Lands Green, Waters Clean. Michael Wyand is the watershed restoration specialist for the City of Gaithersburg. He spent most of his life in and around the Chesapeake Bay watershed, from growing up in Western New York to getting a bachelor's degree in West Virginia to earning a master's here in Maryland. He is currently pursuing a PhD with a focus on employee environmental behaviors, and his goal is to help people make small changes that create big impacts for our environment. Mary Lavinka has been a homeowner in Gaithersburg since 1999 and has had native plants in her yard for 5 years. Mary is also a founding member of the Muddy Branch Alliance and currently serves on the executive board. When not gardening, Mary can still generally be found outdoors, hiking, or battling invasive plants with the Montgomery County Weed Warrior program. Our panelists are here to answer your questions. Whether you are joining us tonight from a computer, a tablet, or a smartphone, you should have access to a questions box. Please use it at any time during this evening's discussion. But our first questions tonight are for you, the audience, starting with, where are you? All right, I see some answers coming in. We have some folks in Gaithersburg, some folks in Montgomery County. It looks like a couple of folks elsewhere, maybe even a couple from out of state. Most folks have voted. Go ahead and let us know where you are if you haven't yet. All right, thanks very much. It's good to know where our people are. We're also interested to know how many folks are here tonight. How many people in your household are joining us this evening? All right, I see some folks logging in alone. Some folks have a second person with them. I see some larger groups joining us. Most folks have voted now. Go ahead and let us know how many people in your household are with us tonight if you haven't yet. All right, and it looks like folks are done with that one. Thank you very much. And finally, are you a native plant novice, an expert, or somewhere in between? Let us know. People have to think about their answer a little longer on this one. All right, I see votes for beginners, people who are thinking. Some folks already have some native plants. Some folks maybe have enough native plants. All right, it seems like we have a lot of people who have some native plants, but they'd like to maybe have some more. Go ahead and vote if you haven't yet. All right, and I will close that poll. All right, thank you very much, audience. Now let's go to some questions for our panelists. Mary, you've had native plants in your yard for 5 years. What is that like? What do you notice about it that's different from having a lawn?
Well, yes, when we started, we just had a big lawn and we were mowing it all the time. And so now, of course, it's quite a large native plant area. it's less mowing. And one thing we notice we do quite a bit is the deck looks out over the garden, and we watch the garden. We enjoy watching the changing seasons. We enjoy watching the bees and moths and different kinds of butterflies come and enjoy the garden. And so we do enjoy watching the garden.
And what
Mary,
about,
I just had a quick question, Mary. Do you have a favorite native plant in your garden?
Well, one thing, native plants have awful names, but I think it's the beard's tongue. We give them better names.
some of them have cute names and some of them don't, but what kind of work do you do in your yard that's different from when you had a lawn?
Well, when we had a lawn, we didn't, well, of course you have watering and you have weeding and hoeing and just maintaining and also picking the wildflowers and making them bouquets for when you want the bouquets. So those are the main differences.
Okay. Lauren, many people are interested in native plants because they want to see more birds and butterflies in their yards. How does that work? If I want more birds, why can't I just put up a bird feeder?
Well, it turns out that if you want more birds, you need to feed the baby birds. And baby birds like to eat caterpillars for the most part. Most birds feed their young caterpillars. So to get more birds, you want more caterpillars, and to get more caterpillars, you need native plants because the plants and the insects have co-evolved, and insects, feed on the plants. Probably most people know about the monarch butterfly as an example. Its caterpillar must feed on milkweed plants. There's a plant with a bad name, the weed in it, but it's really not a weed, it's amazing native. So that's just one example, but that's sort of the typical normal example for most insect and bird relationships. So plant natives and you will increase your bird population.
Can you give us some other examples of native plants that caterpillars like to eat?
Oh, lots. Well, actually, so you could there's long lists, in fact, developed by Doug Ptolemy. He's a professor at the University of Delaware, and he has looked at the relationship between insects and plants and has found that some species of plants are better at hosting caterpillars than others. So, for example, goldenrods as a group host lots of different kinds of caterpillars. I think it's something like 115, if I'm remembering correctly. But the most amazing plants for hosting caterpillars are oak trees.
Mm.
They host over 500 different types of caterpillars. That's not 500 caterpillars, that's 500 different types of caterpillars. So if you really want to increase your caterpillar population for feeding the birds, plant an oak tree.
Great, that's good to know. Michael, people may have also heard that native plants conserve water or make water cleaner or prevent flooding. What's going on with that?
Well, first I wanted to say, Mary, my favorite native plant is the Turk's cap lily, and it's a beautiful flower, and I don't know if I've ever seen it out in the wild, to be completely honest, but it's a really cool looking plant. And second, Lauren, I was thinking, Dr. Talmy, I really like his perspective from the film about kind of changing the mindset and talking about how lawns are you can still use turf grass, but having it more as a pathway to kind of navigate your lawn and to flow around things. And I think that is just an amazing idea. And it's really changing the mindset of everyone out there so we can get to that place. And Jeanette, to get back to the question about just native plants and water, it really the animals out there kind of evolved with the plants as they went on. So you have the soil fungi and the bacteria in there and all the little critters that are running around in there. They evolved with these plants over time. So when you plant native plants in the ground, you have all these critters that is creating this healthy soil health and a healthy ecosystem underneath, which is retaining more of the water. So when it rains, the water stays in the soil and it's being filtered out and it's holding it longer. So it's being released at a slower rate. So, when you're planting more natives, you're having less water runoff especially even on turf grass, you'll have water running off of that. So with the natives, you know, it's just better for the soil, which means it's better for the water that's kind of soaking into it.
Mm. And can you explain a little how rain gardens work? There are certain kinds of plants that work well in rain gardens because they have some special adaptations, right?
Sure. You know, I would probably look to Lauren to talk about the different types of plants that may be good for a rain garden. But the way that the rain garden kind of works is that any of the water that is coming off, you know, sheeting across the ground, it goes into this, you know, this saucer looking thing, and then it filters out through the plants and gets uptaked by the roots and everything. So it's collecting some of the contaminants and anything that's kind of dirty that's washing into there and filtering that water out. But I'm not exactly sure about all of the adaptations. I don't know, Lauren, if you had any ideas of some of the good plants out there for those rain gardens.
Well, you know, so with the rain garden, as you were saying, there's this sort of, it's kind of a dish shape, and the bottom of the bowl is the wet part. So you need plants that can handle even maybe a little standing water some of the time. But that said, a rain garden is also designed to dry out. So you have to have plants that are adapted to both being wet and dry. So some examples, iris is often used in that setting. I just off the top of my head, let's see, I'm trying to think of other species, but there are actually lists that you can find if you're designing a rain garden. So you'll find that there's going to be a list of plants that are suited to that bottom area that can handle that wetter condition. And then there's the side slopes that are a little bit drier, but they still have some moisture. And then higher up on the edges, those are going to be even drier. So you really do have to plan accordingly to where in the rain garden you're planting to really have a successful outcome. Hope that I didn't really list specific plants, but I hope that kind of gives you an idea of how to think about that.
Mm. Yeah, one thing people might not know is that milkweed is really a whole family of plants, not just one plant. And monarch caterpillars like some kinds of milkweed better than others, but also the different kinds of milkweed grow in different places. So I know some of them are good for rain gardens, while some of them are good for drier places. So
That's
that's
true.
something people can think about when they're looking for plants that would be good for their yard. I already see a lot of people are finding that question mark icon and sending in their questions. So one question we have is, what about for small yards? Like maybe if you can only put some pots out on your deck, what kind of native plants would be good for that?
Would you like me to jump on that?
Sure.
I'm actually playing around with that myself just for fun. And I was putting a mixture of things. So one of the plants that I was trying was an aster. It's called aromatic aster because it tends to stay smaller. So I thought that would be a nice possibility, and it seemed to work pretty well last year. We'll see how it holds up over time. And then there's a plant called blue-eyed grass, which is a little native. That's sort of it's actually a little tiny iris, so it's nice and it can fit tightly into a pot. Um, there are some nice grasses that you could try. Purple love grass I've seen used really in a really interesting way in pots before. Actually, in really a big long swath. Someone had a big long kind of almost trough of it, which was really beautiful in the later summer. So you could definitely grow them in pots. That's totally doable. Even though I think some people here are going to know that natives tend to have rather deep roots compared to, say, turf grass. That's one of the reasons they're so good at capturing the water runoff. But that does not preclude their ability to grow in pots. They do fine, most of them. Not everyone. You know, you might want to kind of choose plants that are a little more tolerant of a variety of conditions, but they do grow fine in pots.
We also have a question about native plants for larger areas, specifically paddocks or pastures. Do you know some native plants that can stand up to being grazed on by sheep and ponies?
That's tricky. There are some plants, actually, I believe, I'm not an expert in this, so in terms of the grazing issue, but I do believe that milkweed, for example, is sort of discouraged in pastures because I think it's kind of a toxic plant to horses and things like that. So really do need to do your homework on that if you're going to have animals grazing in a setting like that. But I would say that you would be fine. There's plenty of native grasses to choose from that are quite beautiful. And I think those would probably all be fine to put into a pasture setting. Big blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, they're all, tough, bigger native grasses that have really pretty blooms. Even little blue stem is another one. There's a number of grasses that would be nice, and that's actually part of what makes up a really healthy meadow, is to have grasses in there. So you could have grasses, and there's probably, I don't know, I'm afraid to even suggest specific flowering plants because I don't know enough about the grazing issue. But there are lots of beautiful flowering plants out there. Of course, if they're going to get eaten, then that's tricky. You're not going to get as many flowers. So kind of a balance.
And
Yeah.
I would also add too that if you're interested in finding out the answer, if it's about the grazing, you could always contact your local soil conservation district or your NRCS, which is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They're very up on, what types of plants to use for pastures.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, the film mentioned too that a plant's function in the world is to be eaten. So I'm glad to see people are thinking about how their native plants are going to play that role on their piece of land. All right, so we've talked about some types of native plants and we've talked about some of the great things that native plants do. So let's talk about how to get some native plants. Mary, can you tell us briefly about your native plant journey? Once you decided you wanted some native plants in your yard, how did you go about putting them there?
Well, when we started our journey, we would go to Lowe's and ask them, and we'd ask them what native plants were, and they would say, oh, Japanese Burberry is a native plant and the deer won't eat it. It's wonderful. Well, it is not a native plant. So one thing is you need to kind of know what you're doing if you're going to just go to a Lowe's and buy plants. So how did we get it? We started, we were with it was the Land's Green, Water's Clean Foundation, and they were partnering with the Chesapeake Bay, and we had a grant, and we had a team of people. We had our garden planned for us. They asked what we liked, and what plants we liked, what colors we liked, what we thought we would like in the garden. We have 2 oak trees, so we're hoping for lots and lots of caterpillars. And they planned the garden for us, and then some people came in and planted it for us. It's quite large, and that's how we went about getting the garden in there. Since then, we have expanded some of our side gardens and made things bigger, but we do that in small pieces because it's us driving the shovel, and it's a bit of work.
Mm. So, Lauren, a big challenge for many people is literally getting native plants. Without endorsing any specific purveyor of native plants, where could somebody go to find genuine natives?
Well, let's see. I'm not sure about the not endorsing any particular, but I'm going to suggest that a couple things. One, there are a couple not-for-profits in the area that offer natives that are available both locally. So, for example, the Muddy Branch Alliance is going to host a sale later on in April, and with distribution in early May. Locust Grove Nature Center, which is part of the county park system, also has a sale, as does the Friends of Black Hills, which is another park group. And then if you're looking for some not-for-profits that specialize in just, all they do is produce and sell locally sourced natives, that would be Chesapeake Natives, which is down in Upper Marlboro area, and then another group called Ursanga, which is over in Virginia. Beyond that, if you're going to your nursery, I really encourage people to ask for natives. And if you can ask for natives that are locally sourced, to try to drive our nursery businesses to offer that, because that's kind of a rare thing. They don't tend to do that. So if we could start asking for that, they would be more likely to start selling those. So I'm not really going to list any commercial nurseries, but that would be helpful if we could just go to our local place and buy them. instead of, driving or waiting for these, sort of once a year sale events, which is a little tough to get a hold of. I don't know if that was kind of what you were looking for in terms of an answer, but
Yeah. Tell your
generally,
local mainstream nurseries that you want more native plants.
yeah.
But hey, I have another question. What's a nativar and why should people watch out for them?
So a nativar is you can talk about plants as the straight species, which is the wild version that evolved, and it's just, what it would look like out in the wild. And then there are things called cultivars, which are highly selected plants. And a cultivar can either be a native or a non-native species. It doesn't have to be, one or the other. A nativar refers to cultivars from native plants. And a cultivar is just a selected variety of any one species, and sometimes they're usually chosen because they have some, color change or something aesthetic about them that is desirable. But sometimes they're also selected because they have a insect, or I'm sorry, a disease resistance feature. So it's a little bit of a mixed thing. I encourage people to use straight species because that is the plant that's going to have the most amount of genetic diversity, which is really healthy for the environment. It makes the plants more likely to survive in the long run. A cultivar is going to be bred and its genetic diversity will be reduced, but sometimes a cultivar or a nativar is useful because it's shorter. So you have a situation where you need a short, shrub or something, you might be able to get a shortened version of a native in there, which is actually beneficial. The research out there that has been done has shown that in some cases, changing the color of the leaf and changing the color and shape of the flower is detrimental to the use of the plants for insects because they can no longer eat them. When you change the color of the leaf, it changes the chemistry of the leaf, and then the insects can't eat it anymore. So that's what I caution about. Like if you're going to choose a cultivar, if you're going to choose a nativar, okay, go for the ones maybe that have the dwarf feature, but stay away from the ones that have the change in leaf color and flower color or flower shape. Flower shape has to do with, surprisingly, the length of bee tongues. They are very highly adapted to the type of flower shape, and if you change the shape of the flower, then their tongues can no longer reach the nectar.
Oh, the poor bees.
I kind of like that image of those little bees with their tongues reaching in and they can't get
Oh,
it.
wow, that's so good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's some reasons that I might want a cultivar, but there's also some reasons to be careful of them. When
Yep.
I'm looking at a plant in a nursery, how do I know if it's a cultivar or a real species? How can I tell?
So the cultivars generally have some kind of name in a parentheses. I'm trying to think of a good example. Okay, the shrub Itia virginica, Virginia sweet spire. There's a common one called Little Henry. So it'll say Virginia sweet spire, and then in parentheses, Little Henry. That Little Henry means it's a cultivar, as an example. So that's usually
Okay,
how
so
you
the
know.
fancy Latin names are for real species, and the cute little names are cultivars.
Well, it doesn't necessarily, it's not just the Latin name, because you can have a common name, and then it's that parentheses thing that is the tip off. Yeah,
Okay, so when I see parentheses, I should be careful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Your antenna has to go up, and then you have to do your homework.
All right, that's good advice. Thank you.
Mhm.
Still on the subject of how we can get native plants for our yards, Michael, I've heard that if Gaithersburg residents put native plants in their yard, the city will reimburse them for part of the cost. Are the rumors
That is,
true?
the rumors are absolutely true. We have what's called the Rainscape Rewards Program, and there's a few different kind of categories in the program itself, but one of them is doing conservation landscaping. which is just regrading the ground to help kind of trap that water as it's flowing through. And you can plant the natives plants in there. And we do offer rebates to Gaithersburg residents. We also have a rainwater harvesting rebate for anybody who wants to put in rain barrels. And we also do soil testing as well. You know, Lauren, I also was thinking about Dr. Talamy's definition of what a native actually is. And I found that very mindful and thoughtful at the same time, because that's one of the things that I've always struggled with. Fuzziness is like what is really a native plant and what isn't a native plant. And just the idea that, you know, a native plant is something that is functioning within the ecosystem, that it's useful for all the other animals that are out there, is just a really good thought-provoking thing when planting your own plants. And I know that Elizabeth Catt during the film also with East Colorado Water Conservancy District, I think, she also mentioned about talking about using a sense of place when designing your gardens and when putting plants in your back lawn. So it's you know, I just thought those were two really good points from the film that kind of feed into the conversation that we're having. But also, yeah, Jeanette, we definitely have Rainscape rewards. And if you're ever interested in knowing more, you can contact me and I'll be happy to tell you all about the programs.
Well, how can we contact you?
At my email, which is michael.wine@gaithersburgmd.gov. And if you can't remember that, there's always the city's website where you can just log on, go right to type in Rainscape's rewards or stormwater program, and you can just email that, and love to have a conversation about it.
Well, that's great. I sure hope everybody tells their friends about that one.
Certainly.
We've got a
Can I-
couple of
can I-
questions.
Can I
Hmm?
jump in really quickly?
Yes, you can.
So Michael's point about that planting and kind of from where you are sort of idea. So in the world of landscape design, there's a term called a reference landscape. And the idea here is when you're going out to design a site, you go to some place that has a pretty healthy healthy situation and look at the plants that are growing there and try to use those as your guide for what to plant. That turns out to be quite difficult often in an urban setting, obviously, because everything's been kind of, bulldozed over. But it's an idea to think about, like what would have been there, had we not built all our homes or disrupted it with invasives or something, and using those plants as your guide to plant your garden. It's a nice way to do it.
So we just got a question. How can people learn about rain barrel systems? What are some good resources?
So normally I like to piggyback off of the Montgomery County's Rainscapes program because they just have excellent resources. So if you ever just wanted to type in like Montgomery County on Google and look up their Rainscapes program, they have lots of different PDFs that can talk you through from what you need to consider when putting in a rain barrel and all the different kind of parameters that are involved with putting it in.
And the Muddy Branch Alliance is going to have a workshop on that at some point. So there'll be some opportunities, as will another group called Urban Ecosystem Restoration. So keep your eye out for those kinds of events.
Lots of great resources.
Mm-hmm.
And we have 3 rain barrels, so
Wow.
we use them. They work.
Yeah, that's right. You can use them to water your plants, so then you don't have to use the tap water, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so it's good for the plants and it's good for your water bill.
It's good for your water bill. They're along the side of the house where you tend to have plants.
Very convenient.
Well, yep.
Mm-hmm. So we've also got a few questions about how to protect your native plants after you have some. So one question is, the cicadas are coming. Should we even bother trying to plant anything?
I will try to answer that. I've been trying to follow this a bit because I've had a couple people ask me also, and I've been hearing from some people who are, IPM people who, specialize in looking at insects and how they're going to affect farming and things like that. And it seems that it's not for herbaceous material. First of all, it's not an issue. Cicadas are going to be more interested in woody plants. So if you're planting a tree or something, it might be an issue. However, I am hearing that we should not panic, that it's probably not as bad as it sounds. If you're concerned, you can wrap your plants in, I think like the row cover material, it's sort of this filmy stuff that you can get to use as row cover, but it's really only necessary if your plant stem if your plant's very young. So if you're planting a tree and it's like tiny, that might be an issue, but if it's a, healthy tree that's already in the ground and all that, don't worry, you'll be fine. I can't offer you a whole lot more, but I'm thinking we should probably not panic.
And this is a reason why it's important to have some diversity in our landscapes, right? Different kinds
True.
of plants, different ages of plants. So
Yep.
when cicada swarms come, something will survive, something will
That's
be
a
okay.
good point.
Yeah. So we also got a question. What do you do if your native plants are being overrun by wavy leaf basket grass? How do you get rid of that stuff?
I will attempt to answer that if anybody else has good ideas, but it is a perennial invasive grass. Its seeds are super sticky, so you want to get it before it goes to seed and try to remove it. It's a problem for sure. So you're going to be wanting to cut it at the base, gently pull it, try not to do soil disturbance when you pull your weeds. That's just a generally good practice so that you don't turn up the soil and increase more weed seed into the, exposing more weed seed to the sun. Try to get it before it goes to seed. That's the best way, because otherwise it's just going to keep going. It's very difficult though. It's spreading through the parks and coming into people's yards. So the other strategy here is, to the extent possible, plant densely. Fill the ground with good plants and don't let the weeds have a chance to, set seed or even get sunlight. That is the best way to manage for weeds in general. But you're still going to have to weed, and stuff is going to come in. It's very hard to completely eliminate that. I don't know,
But we
Mary,
can.
has Mary had that in her yard, and are you having any luck?
Well, I don't have the wavy
Wavy
basket leaf, but we do have the stilt grass, and it's really weird because, my garden is large and the stilt grass only grows where the black-eyed Susans grow. It doesn't grow anywhere else. So I'm trying different methods to try and get rid of it. We'll see what works.
Yeah. So, but we can fight plants with plants, right? To keep out invasive, we want to have lots of plants instead of plants sitting in mulch, right? Mulch is an invitation to invasives, isn't it?
Yeah, that's basically what I was saying. It's
Yeah.
just fill up the ground, cover it. There's some nice ground covery type things like I love the Pachyra aurea, or golden groundsel weed is a good one, and then also one of my favorites is lyre-leaf sage, Salvia lyrata. It fills up the ground very quickly, and it keeps a leaf all the way through winter, so there's never really any ground showing once you get that filled in. So using plants like that as sort of an underlayer to keep everything covered.
Great. I see a question that I can answer. Is Gaithersburg going to join the Bee City program? That's an excellent question. We looked into it. We determined that we are really already doing everything the program asks cities to do. We did not think the bees would derive any additional advantage from Gaithersburg paying the registration fee to officially be a bee city. So we are sort of an unofficial bee city. We do love bees. Okay. Lauren, I know you have brought us a slideshow of native plant gardens in Gaithersburg. Can you play that for us and tell folks where they can see these native plant gardens in person?
Sure. Let me try to share my screen. We'll hope it works. Give it a shot. Okay, are you seeing my screen?
Yes, that looks good.
Okay, and then I need to go to slideshow. And so this first one is actually a garden designed by Mary Kay Smith. If she's on the call and can join in, she could talk about this one. That's at Pleasant View Church, which is very close. It's actually basically right across the border of Gaithersburg, so very close to the city. But
Okay, I do see you, Mary Kay. I'm going to make you a panelist. So we should be able to see you now if you can turn on your camera. And you can maybe tell us a little about this garden that you work on.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I'm not seeing myself, but that's okay. The main thing is you can hear my voice. So Pleasant View is located on Darnestown Road, just across from Kentlands and near the Potomac Garden Center. If you're familiar with that, if you're a gardener in our area, you've probably been to that garden center. You may have noticed a very old white church that kind of looks like it's about ready to topple forward. And that is a historic African-American site. It was purchased by freed slave just after the Civil War, so it's just over 150 years old. The other white structure on the property was the colored school for our part of the county. Most people don't know that. And it was a school up through end of the 1950s into the 1960s. No running water. I mean, it's just very interesting. And as we built this conservation landscaping, we had the chance to get to know many of the people who attended school there and are still living in our community. Anyway, it's a beautiful spot. You should stop by. There's parking there and it's open to the public. You can just stop, wander through the gardens anytime you want. We, over a period of 3 years, have planted a lot of different native plants using about 400 volunteers. And in designing this garden, I tried to plan something that would be both beautiful and interesting in different seasons of the year. Have plants that could grow without any assistance because there's nobody watering these plants. We watered the first year. In fact, Mary, one of our panelists, was a helper to keep the plants watered that first year. But since then, there's been no water except rainwater. And so if you want to get an idea of, and I purposely chose a broad range of plants so that people could visit this site and learn about plants that they could use in their home gardens. Many of the plants have ID name tags on them. And if you go to the website eartheast.org, under Pleasant View, there's a lot of information about this garden, including at the bottom a plant list. And so all the plants that we purchased are on that list. And if you see plants that are on that list, but you don't find them in the garden, that tells you something about their ability to sustain themselves when there's not anyone watering them and helping them along. So the plants that you do see there, you know, are pretty rugged because, you know, they've been able to grow for multiple years with no human intervention other than we do some weeding, but, you know, no additional water. Is that enough, Lauren?
yeah, I think that's great. I will add that I know we talked about this. The garden in general is pretty deer resistant, right? Plants.
Right, it is, because surprisingly, considering that we're right on this 4-lane highway and that the property is fenced, I didn't think we'd have a lot of deer, but there's a gap in the fence. And this is an area that used to have woods that now the perimeter is townhouses. So I think that the deer that are in this area don't have the forage that they used to have. So they actually do come on a nightly basis and eat what's in the garden. So some of our shrubs like the oak leaf hydrangea, they really have not been able to, they're still alive, but they're not thriving because they are browsed so heavily. So anything you see in this garden is able to grow with pretty heavy deer presence.
That's great. Thanks, Mary Kay.
Mary Kay,
Sure.
I had a quick question. What's the plant with the big red flower in the middle? That's really pretty.
Yes, isn't that beautiful? Those we have beautiful native hibiscus, and in the garden. So this was funded by the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and the way they count native plants is anything that was in the. There's a lovely publication put out by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife that is entitled, if you Googled native plants for the Chesapeake Bay region, you would find this document, and it's a great resource. Anyway, so any plant that's listed in there was something I could use. And also they allowed us to use some cultivars. So there are some of these plants are cultivars. And because I wanted something that would be showy, that people could drive past on the highway at high speed and still notice there was a garden there, which these are plants that people notice at a distance and really enjoy. So I purposely chose, this photo shows there are several large beds like this picture. And in this one this is a cultivated variety of the native hibiscus. And then I also have some mixed in there that are the straight species. And the difference, the straight species don't have the dark leaves, they're more of a green leaf, and the flower is more star-like, and it's a bright, like fire engine red. I actually think it is just as pretty as this cultivated form. And it is a straight species of the hibiscus coccineus. Anyway, if you go to the website eartheast.org, you'll see the difference, some photos of, and you'll be able to, after that description, I think, tell from the photos which is the straight species and which is a cultivated form.
Thanks, Mary Kay.
Sure.
All right, I'll move through. So all of the gardens that I'm going to show you are full of native plants, all native plants. The next one is an example that was put in at Woodland Hills Homeowners Association, and it was a project under the Muddy Branch Alliance's Lands Green Waters Clean program, funded by the City of Gaithersburg and the Chesapeake Bay Trust. This was shortly after installation in March of 2018. The plants were planted fairly densely, so the garden got off to a quick start, and by November of that same year, it was doing really well, thriving and already starting to fill in really nicely. So I think that was a nice example of a quick growing situation. The next one is at the Isaac Walton League of America, one of our co-hosts tonight, another one funded by the city and the Chesapeake Bay Trust. This is a 7,000 square foot meadow with a rain garden. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but there's a rain garden right here, and it flows out into this big meadow area. The rain garden is capturing water off of the roof over here on the right, and it was designed to be a low maintenance installation. So rather than a carefully arranged plan, this is a naturalized meadow. Any water that is overflowing from the rain garden goes out into the meadow area. This was installed last summer using mostly seed to keep the installation costs down and also provide for a really dense planting. And the idea here is the high density of desirable plants will help control the weeds. I encourage you to visit this over the next couple of years to see, what it looks like. And actually, the upper picture, you can see it was during installation. Our next garden is called the Butterfly
Lauren,
Commons. Yeah. Sorry,
I wanted to make a comment on that last, the one at the Isaac Walton Lake. I think that this one is a perfect example of designing something with a sense of place in mind, because it really is such take a very close look of what's existing around to pick out the really tailor your seeds and what you're collecting and planting it in the ground. And I thought this was a really awesome project. Anyway, that's all.
Yeah, I'm excited to see this one evolve. We haven't seen a whole lot out of it yet, but I think it's going to be fun to watch it evolve over time.
Yeah,
Okay.
evolution is very much a part of the native plant garden process, and it can be hard to find pictures of that really early in progress stage. People see the later pictures and then they feel bad because their garden doesn't look like that right away. So the Isaac Walton League project is a really great opportunity right now to go and see what a native plant garden in progress looks like. It's really interesting.
Well, here's another one like that. This is the Butterfly Commons on Main Street in Lakelands. And this is a 4,000 square foot turf conversion managed by the Urban Ecosystem Restoration's Healthy Habitat Program. It was also funded by the City of Gaithersburg and the Chesapeake Bay Trust to help control stormwater running off of rooftops and other impervious surfaces. You can see in the lower photo, this was before installation, and the turf there, and it's a little bit hard to see, and I can't, there's my cursor. The water flowing off of this turf, this is a particularly wet spot, and down the sidewalk. And what was happening is that this water was icing up in the winter and making the area making it difficult. So they were applying salts to the sidewalks to make the sidewalks safe. And those salts, of course, eventually end up in our waterways, impacting habitat and the quality of our drinking water. So the project was designed using all native plants in a formal style to blend in with the other community gardens at the lakelands. And the idea here is to help reduce the amount of water icing up and ultimately the salt being used. The formal style is elicited with a row of evergreen hedges and long straight rows up in front to kind of set a tight border with a more mingly area in the middle. And this upper photo shows it's really just during installation, and it currently looks, very raw. I mean, it's just been installed in the fall of this last year, so another one to take a look at to see kind of what it looks like in the beginning. All right, our next garden is Constitution Garden Park. This is located in downtown Gaithersburg. It includes native gardens, pervious paving, and a wonderful nature play space. So if you have little ones, definitely take them along because they'll have a lot of fun. And in this one, I like to point out the idea of cues to care. And that's creating a garden that has a legible design so that even if it's like a highly naturalized setting like this, you can still see that it was designed and it's a tended garden. This helps to dispel the idea that native gardens are messy, which is a common misconception. Also, selecting the right plant and putting it in the right place is important. So, for example, these beautiful asters and the grasses, even though they're sort of floppy, they have been set back far enough so they don't flop over on the sidewalk. Okay, and our next garden is Mary's garden. I have two images, and I'm going to let Mary talk about her own garden here. This was at installation, so go for it, Mary.
So this is at installation, and the side on the left is by the house, and of course the other side is by the road. It's our side of our house, and so it's a slope, and before we put it in, you could see it would rain, and the water would just sheet down. And so if you look about 3/4 the way down, there's a lighter color, and that's Little Rock Garden. And before that, there's a berm so the water comes still kind of flows down. It hits the berm, which slows it down. And then in where the rock garden is, the drain from the side of our house goes into that garden. And so all the rain from the roof of the house is going into the garden. Plus we have a rain barrel on the front of the house, and that also waters the garden, helps water the garden. So at installation, it does look like this. And now it looks nothing like this because everything is just much larger. So this is a few years later. And the oak trees, we have 2 oak trees, are starting to grow. And the edges, you have to work on the edges. They tend to kind of fall in, and you have to keep pushing them out. And also the weeds from the yard tend to go in. So there is some weeding involved. But we watched, we had help with our garden, and they planted, and so something is always in bloom, something is always in season, and it's beautiful. And if you look over here, that's a monarch. It's a caterpillar. We get many butterflies. When we first had the garden, we had signs up that said butterfly garden, butterfly garden. Everybody thought they would only see monarchs. That's not true. There's many different kinds of butterflies that you see.
Nice. Thanks, Mary. It's a fun garden. All right, our next one is Epworth Church. This was installed a number of years ago with funding again from the city and the Chesapeake Bay Trust. The project was managed by the Muddy Branch Alliance. It's located on the grounds and roof of the church of Epworth Church, which is along Frederick Road. And I did say roof. So here is an aerial view of this green roof, and then you sort of see it edge on here in this shot. So that's helping to manage water on the rooftop. In this garden, there's also a cistern, which is shown over here on the right on the bottom. It's pretty big. It captures probably, I'm going to guess that's probably a couple 100 gallons being captured right there off of the roof of the church. and that collected water is used to water their vegetable garden. So it's like a rain barrel on steroids. It's like an extra big version. So that's the last of those, but I do want to mention that with the exception of the newly installed meadow and the butterfly commons, that all of these gardens are featured on the Muddy Branch Alliance's self-guided butterfly, bird, and bay-friendly garden tour. The tour is available as a downloadable page on the Muddy Branch Alliance's website and includes addresses, where to park, and a brief description for each garden. You can take this tour any time of the year. And in fact, I actually recommend visiting these sites at different times so you can see, what they look like at different times of year with different things blooming, and even you can kind of get some inspiration for maybe some ideas of plants to use for the winter interest and things like that. The Muddy Branch Alliance is planning yet another garden tour later on this year, so stay in touch. Make sure you get on the newsletter so you receive announcements about that, as well as programming to help manage your stormwater, reduce your turf, and use natives in your landscaping. And that's it for my presentation, and I'm trying to figure out
thank you
how to
so
stop
much for that
sharing.
virtual tour.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to some audience questions now, and I'm going to remind folks to send in all their questions before we wrap up for the evening. But here's a question. Mary Kay gave us one answer a few minutes ago, but maybe we can provide some other answers. Where can folks in this area get a list of native plants, and what kinds of conditions those plants like? Where can they find that?
So I'm going to recommend using so Mary Kay's, the resource that she shared is excellent, and I definitely recommend using that. There is a website that's based on that information. It's, I'm going to try to remember, if it's Native Plant Center, I think is that. Now I'm going to have to look it up. There's a searchable database, and maybe we can do a follow-up email with some resources. Would that be something we could do? Yeah, so
We can do that.
We'll put that together with a few things. I believe it's nativeplantcenter.net is the website name. And it's really nice because you can type in the region. So we live in the Piedmont area of Maryland, so you can really focus in a little bit on your area. And you can list moisture levels, sun levels, soil type, whether you have clay, silt, loam, those sorts of things. So, and then you can also, I think you can select flower color. You can select whether you want trees, shrubs, or herbaceous plants. So it's really helpful when you're trying to figure out, at least it narrows it down. It's not a totally comprehensive list because there's just too many plants, but I will say that it's a list that probably is plants that you can generally get. That's important. So things you can actually buy as opposed to every native ever described, which is often not available, right? That's a mistake I have made. I'm like, you look in the book and you're like, oh, I want that one, but you can't get it. So
they all seem so nice.
Yeah.
But our yards are only so large. So that's Native Plant Center?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay. I think also if you search for Native Plant Finder Talamy, that same native plant expert we saw in the film, that will give you a list of native plants and what conditions they like and what butterflies like them. So that's a really great website to take a look at. Okay, another question we have is, how effective are butterfly houses? Are those any good?
I have not heard that they're particularly good. I don't know a lot about it though, I'll say that, but I'm not hearing that they're like really all that great at providing actual, habitat for a butterfly. It's better to plant plants.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing about bee houses, that instead of a box with artificial stems, just leave your plant standing in the winter because bees are hibernating in them or nesting in them and making little baby bees. And native bees are great because they do not sting. So it's fine to have them in your yard.
I think an important thing to think about when you're considering those kinds of things, and even birdhouses for that matter, is that they have a tendency to have, disease associated with them. So if you group up a lot of any one critter, you're going to get disease. So that's important. So if you have bee houses, you're supposed to clean them. If you have a birdhouse, you're supposed to clean it out at the end of the year, all that sort of stuff. So if you're a lazy gardener like me, that just means more work. And so I'm kind of not inclined to go that route pretty much. I do have to admit I have bluebird houses, but otherwise I try to kind of minimize that kind of thing.
Yeah. Also, the predators figure out where all the bees are grouped together or all the butterflies. And so that's not
Right.
very good for your house guests.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I'm looking if we have any more questions this evening. I think we've answered most of them so far. All right. We've got a comment that there are some Facebook groups for Maryland area environmentally conscious gardeners and Maryland native gardeners that may also have databases about native plants.
Those groups are actually very good. And I'll make a little pitch for the Wild Ones Chesapeake chapter. The Wild Ones is an organization that is generally focused on landscaping with natives. And there's a local chapter. So if you're into that, they do plant swaps and things like that. So they're a good group.
Native plants for hummingbirds. Hummingbirds love red flowers and long flowers. Do you know some specific plants they like?
I do. Monarda didyma, bee balm. There's a red one there. It does tend to get mildewy, so that's a thing. The leaves. And then while it's more of a coastal species, the native trumpet honeysuckle, Lonicera sempervirens, is fantastic. I actually moved from California, where there's lots of hummingbirds, several different species of hummingbirds, to New York. And I thought, oh, wow, I'll never see a hummingbird again. I was really kind of bummed out. And then I planted that up in New York. And within the first year, I had a hummingbird at my house. So that was pretty amazing. So they definitely find it.
I've also noticed that hummingbirds love fountains because they are so small. Just the spray from a fountain is all the water they want. So if you have one of those, you'll see them fly through it, and that's really fun. We have a question. The city provides funding for rain barrels and rain gardens. What about pervious driveways?
That's a great question. So that's something we're thinking of expanding into, and we're starting to kind of outline that process and frame it out to see what is the best way to approach it, because it is a little bit more advanced than just conservation landscaping and doing the rain barrels. It takes a little bit more of an engineering kind of design look into it. But we're investigating that, and stay tuned because I anticipate it to be coming here shortly.
All right. So that is just about all the time we have for this evening. If you found this conversation inspiring, take note of 2 upcoming opportunities to get low-cost, high-quality native plants for your yard. The Native Tree Giveaway provides free trees, while the Native Plant Sale features dozens of species from a local nursery. Both events are first come, first served. The plant sale will open for pre-orders in mid-April and is likely to sell out quickly. The tree giveaway is weather dependent and happens on short notice. You can be first in line for both by subscribing to updates from the Muddy Branch Alliance. muddybranch.org/subscribe. Thank you to our panelists, Lauren Hubbard, Michael Wyand, and Mary Lavinka. And thank you again to our sponsors, the Lands Green, Waters Clean program, the Muddy Branch Alliance, the Isaac Walton League of America, the City of Gaithersburg, and the Chesapeake Bay Trust. As you log out of our conversation, you will see a brief survey. Please do take a moment to let us know what you liked or didn't like about this film screening and discussion panel event. Have a great evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Jeanette.